I'm Kate Booth, Associate Professor in Human Geography at the University of Tasmania. Civilizations invariably collapse. We know this from history and anthropology. Global industrial civilization is no exception. This is a civilization powered by fossil fuels, a unique energy source in terms of abundance and quality. There is nothing else like it. Fossil fuels have enabled large-scale production, mass production, global transport and supply chains, fertilisers for crops, and the lives and livelihoods of the 8 billion people who call Earth home today. It is also a civilization dependent on the relative climate and ecological stability of the Holocene, the last unique 10,000 years. Now a tipping point has been reached. We have burnt through this unique energy source at a rate that outstrips the natural processes that created it. In doing so, a stupendous quantity of pollutants has been released, not the least, carbon dioxide, CO2. The Earth is now warming and will continue to warm for centuries to come. This is overshoot. Using and abusing the Earth faster than it can be replenished, or when it comes to pollutants like CO2, faster than these can be absorbed. And we've done this with fossil fuels and just about everything else identified as natural resources. Ecology, as well as climate systems, are now in collapse, and with them, the livelihoods and lives of billions. The global scale of this civilizational collapse is unprecedented. It can be terrifying in its complexity and ramifications. To make some kind of sense of it all and to work out what to do, it's useful, I think, to focus locally. This is where we are collapsing through natural disasters, economic hardship, food insecurity, conflict, depending on where you live and who you are. And it is also in our local places that we will collapse further. In Western societies, the idea of planning is a key response tool. This is, broadly speaking, the process of identifying actions required to achieve an outcome. Developed during a period of history marked by the ideal of progress, Western ideas of planning now face a crisis. We have been in overshoot for over 50 years, driven largely by wealthy nations, and we are now living the consequences. Agendas for planning and development based on assumptions of infinite growth and prosperity are no longer valid or viable. Understanding the inevitability of collapse demands that instead of planning on the up, on the assumption of growth and development, we must learn to plan on the down, in response to the decline and unravelling of the systems that have supported and sustained many of us. Insurgent planning provides a pathway for this. Developed by activists and academics, particularly in the Global South, insurgent planning turns modern Western planning on its head. Typically, professional planners identify and set agendas on behalf of government. Conversely, insurgent planning does not rely on governments for decision-making and action. Insurgent planning is a form of community planning that occurs when governments break the social contract and fail to act in the public good in providing basic needs and rights. In fact, as more and more people struggle to meet basic needs in a collapsing world, those in power may not only fail to act, they can deliberately turn a blind eye or adopt hostile tactics. In response, communities and citizens can exert and extend power by setting their own agendas and implementing their own actions. They do not wait for elected representatives or other power brokers to act on their behalf. They act outside of formal processes and structures to achieve more equitable outcomes. By its nature, insurgent planning is not sanctioned by government. Insurgent planning has emerged amidst the negative impacts of global industrial civilization and from the types of inhospitable places and marginalised lives created by this civilization. The slums and informal settlements, which over 1 billion people call home, for example, the millions of people who are homeless and seeking refuge, and another example, the toxic and polluted places produced through mass extraction, production and consumption around the world. An example of insurgent planning. In South Africa, the Western Cape anti-eviction campaign resisted forced eviction of informal settlements along a highway that linked Cape Town's international airport to the city. Comprised of residents and organisers from poor townships, this campaign demanded rights to shelter and basic services, and actions included intervening through those paid to carry out the dirty work of forced evictions, communities creating their own data about evicted and threatened families, soup kitchens to feed children, actions to reconnect disconnected services by what became known as struggle plumbers and electricians, mass mobilisations and protests, sit-ins and land invasions, and the use of the legal system. Insurgent planning works in the context of collapse because it is what is termed counter-hegemonic. It is not based on the ideas that dominate thought and action in global industrial civilization, like the idea of infinite economic growth, or the idea of a good citizen as someone who participates in mainstream society as if this is essentially unproblematic. Through insurgent planning, people who are structurally excluded from mainstream participation through employment, ethnicity, race, gender, and other circumstances can redefine the idea of what it means to be a good citizen and demand to be treated accordingly. Another example from Argentina. Buenos Aires, a city of almost 3 million people, has a long history of migration and informal settlements. Such settlements, known as villas, are part of the fabric of the city and are home to people from many different places who have moved in pursuit of opportunity or have been displaced through economic downturn. Almost 1.4 million people live in over 1,000 villas in Buenos Aires. Government interventions have granted legal access to education, health, housing, and the work of migrants, but access to basic rights, the rights of the full citizen, remain limited. Many work in garment sweatshops or on unregulated building sites. Many do not possess the finances or history to access formal housing. With no stable employment and no adequate housing, they live in the villas. For decades, residents of the villas have taken collective action demanding formal recognition of property rights and the provision of basic services from government. Some initiatives are local in focus, like soup kitchens, and others are networked to other places and regions and have a broader political agenda. While many formal non-government organisations, NGOs, in the city act for the rights of different groups based on ethnicity, this is done irrespective of socio-economic status. Collective action in the villas, on the other hand, is based on class and place. There have been times when the villas have had to act in opposition to the NGOs as a way of addressing basic needs and living standards. In December 2010, 13,000 people peacefully occupied a large park in the south of Buenos Aires. For the villas, they demanded a housing improvement plan that had been promised by government years earlier and not delivered. Tensions grew as some NGOs became active in demobilising and undermining the occupation of the park. The NGOs took the position that those occupying the park and living in the villas were guests in the city, not full citizens, and that they should be grateful for what they had. The residents of the villas, on the other hand, embraced the role of insurgent citizens, active political citizens who address issues and raise claims to governments for basic rights. The villas of Buenos Aires and the poverty in Cape Town are not incidental or accidental. They exist because of and as part of global industrial civilization. As global systems break down and resources dwindled, more and more people and places will experience the loss of amenity and basic needs: food, water, shelter, etc. For those in the affluent, individualised West, I think we must learn to see ourselves in the lives of others, those already dwelling in collapse on the peripheries and in the margins, not out of fear and despair, but because there is much to learn and much to do. There is planning and action, even in the most desperate of circumstances, to ease the intensifying localised impacts of global collapse. Another example from Europe. In 2011, for 6 weeks, tens of thousands of people occupied city plazas across Spain, calling for real democracy now and proclaiming we are not merchandise in the hands of bankers and politicians. These indignant ones, were responding to and critiquing the power of the political and financial class. Following the occupation, numerous autonomous neighbourhood assemblies were formed as a means of progressing localised projects and responses. This included groups focusing on housing rights, such as the Platform for Mortgage Affected People, PAH. This platform has now expanded across Spain. Housing is one of the most urgent social issues in this country, with hundreds of thousands of households forced to stop paying mortgages and facing evictions due to unemployment, illness, and unaffordable repayment increases. Many of those affected joined the Platform for Mortgage Affected People and initiated responses such as actively preventing evictions, taking back empty bank-owned houses for reoccupation by evicted or homeless families, and tackling what has been described as a mortgage scam that left many households to repay debts for life following eviction. Established in 2009, by 2016, the Platform for Mortgage Affected People had successfully blocked over 2,000 evictions across the country. Part of this success was based on working with affected households to diminish guilt and shame associated with debt and a loss of housing, and foregrounding the structural rather than individual reasons why this loss has taken place. In this, disempowered evictees become insurgent citizens. This empowerment also frames the taking back of empty bank-owned houses, exemplified by the catch cry, "Take and do," instead of "ask and wait." Up to 2016, 2,500 people had been rehoused this way, with around 50 buildings retaken. In insurgent planning, communities and citizens set their own agendas and act irrespective of government and other established power structures. This means that insurgent planning can act on the down as needed during collapse. Setting an insurgent agenda can take some time. It starts with a community or group working to establish a shared vision, goals and objectives as part of a strategic plan. For the indignados in Spain, this was partly an organic process and partly a planned process. The shared vision was equitable access for all to housing and freedom from tyranny of big money. For the Western Cape anti-eviction campaign, the shared vision was access for all to shelter and basic services. To meet these shared objectives, actions were identified. In Cape Town, this included disruptive actions as well as utilising existing structures such as the legal system. Through insurgent planning, Governments still have a role to play, but this role is defined by the agenda of insurgent communities and citizens and not the other way around. Communities, for example, may be able to locally plan and act for food security. Larger scale issues, however, will likely need to be acted on by government, such as the decommissioning of nuclear power plants. These pose a toxic risk following societal collapse, and decommissioning requires significant technical expertise and resources. As collapse unfolds, plans and actions will need to adapt and change. The reality is that what makes sense today may not make sense in the future. Importantly, insurgent planning within collapse comes with a sober appreciation that, in the end, there will be no win. After 50 years of overshoot, no amount of human agency can turn collapse around, and we can only do what we can do. In understanding that although death will surely come for us all, today is not that day, and there is plenty yet to fight for on the way down. Just Collapse is an activist platform dedicated to socio-ecological justice in the face of inevitable and irreversible global collapse, and of which I am a co-founder with Tristan Sykes. We have developed some action takeaways for doing your own insurgent planning. 1. Existing networks and organisations are key. 2. Well-funded NGOs can be compromised. 3. Relocalisation does not mean isolation. 4. Justice, rights and practical outcomes are partial and relative. 5. Easing the impacts of collapse does not make things easy. For more information on these and examples of insurgent planning taken from all over the world, see the Just Collapse Little Book of Insurgent Planning, which is available free online. Thank you.